Our scripture is from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 14, verses 22 to 23. This is from the New Revised Standard Version and can be found on page 171 in the Old Testament section of your Pew Bible. Regulations concerning tithes. Set apart a tithe of all the yield of your seed that is brought in yearly from the field. In the presence of the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose as a dwelling for his name, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, as well as the firstlings of your herd and flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Well, I am so pleased to see all of you here today on this sort of cold and damp day that's Consecration Sunday. I thought you all might stay home. It's like, it's one of those stewardship days. I think I'll just stay home. I mean, it's cold and windy. I've got an excuse, right? I mean, there were actually people here at 8:30 this morning. It was amazing. But I want to talk a little bit about money today. So we're going to get a little practical stuff, but we're also going to get a little history about what happened with God's people in Israel as God was sort of bringing them along. See, everybody has to make decisions about how we're going to deal with our money. And there are a couple of scholars by the name of Stephen Lee and Paul Webley who talk about two metaphors for the role that money plays in our lives. Money, they say, is a tool and a drug. A tool and a drug. For a long time, economists thought of money only as a tool. We value money because it's useful. Lets us pay our bills, keeps the lights on, we stay fed, get work done, on and on. And we see this in Jesus' parable of the talents, in which the master gives to certain of his servants an amount of money, and then he says to them, put this money to work until I come back. But this tool theory about money left some odd questions unanswered. Questions like, why is it that people who are already rolling in money want to have more? Why will a person with more than enough money make sacrifices and do foolish things that may damage friendships or family or life or emotional health just to get more money? Money's a tool, but money is also a drug. You see, money makes us feel things we would not otherwise feel. It gives us a temporary escape from pain or a momentary illusion of well-being. We crave money because we like the buzz. And the biblical writers also knew about this particular dimension of money. The Apostle Paul wrote this: people who want to get rich fall into temptation and traps and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Now, I want you to just replace get rich, is what it says here, with the phrase, get artificially relaxed with alcohol and drugs. So, it reads, people who want to get artificially relaxed with alcohol or drugs fall into temptation and traps and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. You see, the parallel with seeking after money and the high that comes from drugs and alcohol are far, far too similar. Money is a tool. Money is a drug. Or in biblical language, money is a servant and money is an idol. So are you using money as a tool for the owner, or are you using money as a drug for yourself? Are you storing up treasures in heaven, or are you storing up treasures on earth as in a vault? You see, money is a fantastic tool. It's a great tool, but it's also a lethal drug. And wouldn't it be great if we could get free from using money as a drug and using it more as a tool for God? Now, God actually created a great vehicle to free people from money as a drug. Guess what it's called? Tithing. Tithing. Now, I have to admit, there are a lot of people who are a little fuzzy on the concept of tithing. So let's start with the fact that tithe is a word that in both Hebrew and Greek simply means a tenth. A tenth. It means to give a tenth of something. And I say this because sometimes people are a little loose with the definition, and they may say something like, well, I tithe $10 a month. Well, for the math challenged among us, the only way you could tithe $10 a week is if you made how much? $100 a week. What they really mean is that they give $10 a week, but it's not a tithe. There's a difference in giving and tithing. However, tithing in the Old Testament involved much more, you're not going to like this, much more than 10%. Anybody excited about this? For Israel, tithing, yeah, the stewardship chairman's very excited. For Israel, tithing was only one part of a very rich, fascinating, concrete, practical way of life designed to produce not some kind of mechanical obedience, but a community of great generosity. And there were actually 3 very specific tithes that when you totaled them up, they actually represent about 23% of income going to support the church and the needs within the community. Are you even more excited now? 23%? In the next few moments, what I want to do is give you a crash course on God's way of generosity for Israel. And then we're going to ask God to create a way of generosity for our day so we can live with money as a tool and not as a drug. So the first 10%, the first tithe, was to actually support the workers in the temple. Now, for us today, that would represent like the church staff. We got to pay Marcos. Aren't we glad to pay Marcos? We're glad to pay Marcos, yes. Now, the second tithe, the second 10%, was to support the ministries of the temple. All those ways that we reach out into the community. And sharing in the joy and gratitude and thanksgiving of being blessed by God. That was part of that tithe. Now, I wonder, have you ever actually connected giving with joy? Yeah, I hope you have. Because giving joyfully is really what God asks of us. And it was always a part. Generosity should spur joy. It should be a part of what we do because we love doing it. Giving in a scriptural manner is about the gratitude and joy we experience from being blessed by God. Now, I wonder if you might need a little help connecting giving and serving with joy and celebration. And one of the things you might want to do is by walking around this campus, look at the children, look at the youth who are being taught to love Jesus. Go and look around and see friends who are meeting friends who are sharing their lives and their faith. Watch people as they learn about the Bible and they apply its teaching. Read our Soundings newsletter online about all the ways that we are serving people all throughout this community and around the world. And then think to yourself, my giving makes all of that happen. Say amen. Now in Israel, there was also a third tithe. It's called the poor tithe. And it was collected once every 3 years. So that's 10% that was collected every 3 years. So it's about 3% per year. And that's how we get to this 23%. You still following me? So the poor tithe was so that the foreigners or immigrants, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns may come and eat and be satisfied, and so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the works of your hands. So 3 tithes. Not always clear exactly what year they were collected, but by tithing, Israelites gave somewhere around 23% of their resources to God. Now, anytime I talk about tithing, one of the number one questions I always get, should I tithe on the net or on the gross? And I always answer, it depends on whether you want God to bless the net or the gross. An awful lot of us, like Israel, could give far more than 10%. You see, that's the baseline. 10% is the baseline. It's the floor, not the ceiling. But I just want to be clear about something. If you're a follower of Jesus, but you're not tithing yet, I want to encourage you to do so. Now, if you happen to be in a financial bind right now, and it's entirely possible you are, then don't start tithing 10%. Become a percentage giver. Maybe you have to start at 1%. And then each year begin to build that up until you finally get to the 10%. But the point is to decide to obey God with your finances. Israel did this. By the way, Israel did that, but guess what? That wasn't their only form of generosity. They did something called first fruits as well. God said to the people of Israel, bring the best of your first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Now, in Israel, they lived day to day, year to year. If the ground didn't produce crops, they were going to die. So when they saw the earliest plants with that fruit appearing, they were filled with gratitude and thanksgiving. What that meant is that probably the whole crop was going to follow, and it meant life. So in Israel, farmers would actually tie a reed to the best, healthiest first plants and say, I'm going to give that, when it comes to full harvest, I'm going to give that back to God. God gave it to me, so I'm going to give it back to God. And the celebration of first fruits brought so much joy that they actually had parades to take the first fruit offering to the temple. It was a day of celebration. Now, the idea of first fruits can change money from a drug to a tool. But the opposite way of handling my money might be called last fruits. Some of us do that. You get your paycheck, pay all the bills, all of my obligations, all of my spending, and then I wait till the end of the month, see how much money I have left to give, and how much is that? Usually not much. Usually not much. You see, what that's saying is, I'm not going to give God first fruits, I'm going to give God the leftovers. But first fruits. Now, I don't know about you, but I still pay certain bills with a check. Anybody remember what a checkbook looks like? And I try to make that first check the tithe check. Takes a little practice. And every time I write that check, I pause and I thank God for all the resources that I have, and I thank God for all that I get to give. Now, maybe you do your financial work online, and maybe even you have it all set up so that it happens automatically, and you don't even see money anymore. God bless you. That's wonderful. But every few weeks, I'll bet you, or maybe at least once a month, you sit down and you review all of your finances. So when you're reviewing your finances and you see that little transaction that says, Christ by the sea, just stop and thank God and tell God that you would like God to be first in your financial life. First fruits. And then there was something called harvest generosity. Now, this was, of course, an agricultural economy. And harvest day is like payday, right, Bill? Where are you, Bill? Is harvest day like payday? Yes, Bill. Say yes, Bill. Mary Lou, are you up there somewhere? Where's Mary Lou? Where are you, Mary Lou? Is harvest day like payday, Mary Lou? Yes, okay. Well, You all know that. You farm. You know that, Peggy, right? We all know that harvest day is like payday for farmers. So here's what happens. God said, when you reap the harvest of your land, don't reap out to the very edges of your field. In other words, leave those edges unreaped. Leave them alone. And also don't gather the gleanings, the things that have fallen on the ground. Just leave them there. Leave it for the poor and the foreigner. So all along the borders of the field, and of course the vast majority of the people were farmers then, they leave the crops there. In that day, it was kind of like leaving money on the outside so the poor could have it. So every once in a while, just leave somebody who needs it a big tip. Just do it. Every once in a while, when somebody is standing on a corner and asks you for money, just give it to them. Every once in a while, when you get a letter from World Vision or International Justice Mission, just go ahead and send them a check. Every once in a while, when some money unexpectedly comes your way, just go ahead and pass it along to somebody else who needs it. That is harvest generosity. Now, there was also something called offerings generosity, where special offerings were done. And in fact, there are long passages in the Old Testament about offerings and sacrifices. In fact, my guess is that if you have read any of the book of Leviticus, that you probably gave up about a quarter of the way through. You're just like, okay, enough of this. But in Leviticus, the writer who's summing up long passages says this: these then are the regulations for the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the ordination offering, the fellowship, and on the list goes. And these passages on the offerings in the Old Testament are incredibly detailed, elaborate, and complex. Not at all simple and straightforward like our tax code. Little tax humor. In that culture, food was money. So a voluntary peace offering, for instance, might actually be enough to feed an entire village. And so much joy was attached to these offerings that part of those offerings was also called a wave offering. Now, can you give me any idea why they may call that a wave offering? Because they waved it. Yeah, they literally waved it. They were making an offering. They'd be taking it to the temple, and they'd be waving the offering. It was a way of saying, I've been blessed. This isn't really mine. God, this is your tool for your work. So just for fun, let's try that for a moment. If you don't mind, everybody just take out wallet, purse. Just take out some money, a credit card. If you're really, I'm waiting. If you're really tech savvy and all you use is your phone and it's got all your credit card, just hold up your phone. You can just hold it. Go ahead, pull them out. We'll wait. Wallet, cash, whatever you've got, just pull it out. Do a little wave. There you go. Okay, now hand that over to your neighbor and we'll take up an offering. All right. Now, let me give you an example of a modern day voluntary offering, which is another one of these ancient offerings. A man was going to give a large gift to a nonprofit organization. And he told this nonprofit executive, do you know why I'm doing this? You know why I'm going to give you this big gift? And of course, the nonprofit executive thought, well, probably because you like our cause, of course. But instead, here's what the man said. I want to buy a nice car. In fact, a really nice car. And I asked my wife if she was okay with it. And she thought about it and said she was okay with it if I made a matching contribution to her favorite charity, and that's you. So that's why I'm doing this. The guy later wrote me and said this: what if we all put a 100% self-imposed tax on luxury items? We could still buy them, but when we did so, we would also give the same amount to God's work. Sometimes we might decide we could do with less. But sometimes we might decide to go ahead, get whatever it was we want, but then we would also do some real good for the world. Now, today I want to get very practical. And I'm going to share some slides with you. Miguel, let's throw that first one up there. And I want to talk about some very specific things for us here at Christ by the Sea. So last year, in 2016, we had members, 215 giving families, and they accounted for about $515,000 of our $770,000 budget. Next. So 166 of those members pledged. Keep that in mind. But you see, the total giving, not just the budget, but the total giving for everything that we did around here was $929,000, and 515 different giving units gave that amount of money. What that means is non-members gave over $414,000, and thank you, non-members. What a gift that is. Next, Miguel. The other good news is that we gave to other kinds of needs and causes throughout the community and the world $154,000 over and above our actual budget needs. That's great news as well. Next, Miguel. So let's look at this. Do you know what the average income in this area is? I just did a demographic. I have this access to this demographic tool, and I mapped out where most of our members lived on this demographic tool. It makes this really weird shape. The average income is around $78,000 for our area. So let's talk about this. If 225 member giving families were the tithe on the average household income, the amount given would be $1,755,000. Next slide. Now you add in the 414 that non-member giving, and that would give us over $2 million to work with the total church needs. Now our budget this year was $777, so you can see that's a big difference. That's $1 million more than we actually received in all of last year. Next. Now, if we were to use the median income, the median income's different than the average. The average, they just add it all together. What's the average number? The median means 500 people make this much, and 500 people give this much, and that middle number is this. Well, the median income is actually much lower than the average income. It's about $48,000. But even with the median income of $48,000, we still would get $1.5 million, which is $500,000 more than we currently receive. Next. So here's a little giving report for last year. This is what people gave in a giving range and the number of people that gave in that amount. So I hope you see that, the majority of people within the church, if the median income is used at $48,000, then what would the tithe be? $4,800. Yeah. So if you look at this, the great majority of our givers gave less than that. Correct? So in other words, there is tremendous room for growth. Isn't that a great opportunity? So I hope that you'll look at this and maybe think about, maybe you can move into another category for this coming year. That's a possibility for you. Next, Miguel. Or is that the last one? The last one. Okay, thanks. So I wanted to also share that there's some other specific things you should be aware of. One is this. Our budget was $777,000 last year. $135,000 of that, and this is something that I've never had in any other church, $135,000 of that was not given through tithes or offerings, but was raised through fundraisers. $135,000. So that match giving thing we do, the pumpkin patch, the golf tournament, those are all fundraisers. Imagine if we didn't have to do those fundraisers. Imagine the time and energy that has to go into those and how that could be put to other kingdom uses. So I would hope that one day we would get away from having to do fundraisers and that we would actually support the church through our tithes and offerings without the fundraisers. And that maybe we could have a special offering now and then that would be something over and above what the specific needs are. Now, another piece of good news is this. 5 years ago, well, let me tell you this first. We have an endowment here. An endowment is money, most of you know this, an endowment is money where the principal is never touched, but the income is used. Now, here at Christ by the Sea, we have an endowment. 5 years ago, we had a $700,000 endowment. That's pretty good. Well, guess what we have now? $1,700,000 endowment. That is great news. We've had some tremendous gifts that have been given to that. It's grown wonderfully. You know, the economy helps that grow as well. And so we are blessed. That spins off $60,000, $70,000 a year that is put back into the property here at Christ by the Sea. So when air conditioner goes bad, there's money there to take care of that. And that's really good news. So we're blessed by having that wonderful endowment. And I hope that you, if you haven't done this, you might think about putting Christ by the Sea in your will, because that's how that continues to grow. A wonderful gift that means that you continue giving even after your death. Okay. So there's some really good news in all of this and some challenges. And I hope that for all of us, that what we'll think about doing is moving toward tithing. And if you're not able to tithe, then become that percentage giver and try to move that up a percentage point every year. So just some challenges for us. Now, there's one other way that Israel was generous. The last way is called Sabbath generosity. You see, the Sabbath is and was a big part of Israel's life. Every seventh day, they rested. They voluntarily gave up income that they could have made by resting and trusting in God. You may not know that every seventh year, there was something called the Sabbath year. They would rest the land. Whatever food had been produced got shared. They would free all the slaves. And not just that, but this is something that was unprecedented in the ancient world. They would actually give their freed slaves money so they could make a living. And they forgave all debts. And then after 7 Sabbath years, okay, so a Sabbath year is every 7 years, so 7 times 7 is 49. So on the 50th year, that was what they called the Jubilee year. And on the Jubilee year, it was a year of tremendous generosity. Not only did they free all the slaves, forget all the debts, but all the land was reverted back to its original owners. It was a wonderful year of generosity. When Jesus began his ministry, you find this in Luke 4, he said that he had come to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, the year of Jubilee, the year of generosity. And Jesus was basically saying this: now in my coming, the Jubilee year, the best gift of all time has been given, because the biggest giver in the universe is God. And God has given us all that we have, and especially he's given us Jesus, the very best he has. He gave us Jesus, who died for our sin and who came to set us free. Now, how could I ever do anything with my resources but surrender them to the original owner? For the graciousness, for the blessedness, for the generosity that's already been shown. Jesus would love that. And it would be amazing for this Vero Beach area and for our church to help get money out of that drug category and into the tool category. Think of what could be done. May God make it so. Amen.